Chapter 7 of Moonfleet. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Graham Redman. Moonfleet by J. Mead Faulkner. Chapter 7. An Auction. What if my house be troubled with a rat, and I be pleased to give 10,000 ducats to have it baned? Shakespeare. One evening in March, when the days were lengthening fast, there came a messenger from Dorchester, and brought printed notices for fixing to the shutters of the Why Not and to the church door, which said that in a week's time the bailiff of the Duchy of Cornwall would visit Moonfleet. This bailiff was an important person, and his visits stood as events in village history. Once in 5 years he made a perambulation or journey through the whole duchy, inspecting all the royal property and arranging for new leases. His visits to Moonfleet were generally short enough, for owing to the Mahoons owning all the land, the only duchy estate there was the Why Not, and the only duty of the bailiff to renew that 5-year lease under which Locks had held the inn, father and son, for generations. But for all that, the business was not performed without ceremony, for there was a solemn show of putting up the lease of the inn to the highest bidder, though it was well understood that no one except Elzevir would make an offer. So one morning, a week later, I went up to the top end of the village to watch for the bailiff's postchaise, and about 11 of the forenoon saw it coming down the hill with 4 horses and 2 postillions. Presently it came past, and I saw there were 2 men in it, a clerk sitting with his back to the horses, and in the seat opposite a little man in a periwig, whom I took for the bailiff. Then I ran down to my aunt's house, for Elzevir had asked me to beg one of her best winter candles for a purpose which I will explain presently. I had not seen Aunt Jane, except in church, since the day that she dismissed me, but she was no stiffer than usual, and gave me the candle readily enough. "There," she said, "take it, and I wish it may bring light into your dark heart, and show you what a wicked thing it is to leave your own kith and kin, and go to dwell in a tavern." I was for saying that it was kith and kin that left me, and not I them, and as for living in a tavern, it was better to live there than nowhere at all, as she would wish me to do in turning me out of her house, but did not, and only thanked her for the candle, and was off. When I came to the inn, there was the post-chaise in front of the door, the horses being led away to bait, and a little group of villagers standing round, for though the auction of the Why Not was in itself a trite thing with a foregone conclusion, yet the bailiff's visit always stirred some show of interest. There were a few children with their noses flattened against the windows of the parlour, and inside were Mr. Bailiff and Mr. Clerk hard at work on their dinner. Mr. Bailiff, who was, as I guessed, the little man in the periwig, sat at the top of the table, and Mr. Clerk sat at the bottom, and on chairs were placed their hats and travelling cloaks and bundles of papers tied together with green tape. You may be sure that Elzevir had a good dinner for them, with hot rabbit pie and cold round of brawn, and a piece of blue vinny, which Mr. Bailiff ate heartily, but his clerk would not touch, saying he had as lief choose soap. There was also a bottle of Ararat milk, and a flagon of ale, for we were afraid to set French wines before them, lest they should fall to wondering how they were come by. Elzevir took the candle, chiding me a little for being late, and set it in a brass candlestick in the middle of the table. Then Mr. Clerk takes a little rule from his pocket, measures an inch down on the candle, sticks into the grease at that point a scarf-pin with an onyx head that Elzevir lent him, and lights the wick. Now the reason of this was that the custom ran in Moonfleet when either land or lease was put up to bidding, to stick a pin in a candle, and so long as the pin held firm it was open to any to make a better offer, but when the flame burnt down and the pin fell out, then land or lease fell to the last bidder. So after dinner was over and the table cleared, Mr. Clark takes out a roll of papers and reads a legal description of the Why Not, calling it the Mohune Arms, an excellent messuage or tenement, now used as a tavern, and speaking of the convenient paddocks or parcels of grazing land at the back of it, called Moon's Lease, amounting to 16 acres more or less. Then he invites the company to make an offer of rent for such a desirable property under a 5 years' lease, and as Elzevir and I are the only company present, the bidding is soon done, for Elzevir offers a rent of 12 a year, which has always been the value of the Why Not. The clerk makes a note of this, but the business is not over yet, for we must wait till the pin drops out of the candle before the lease is finally made out. So the men fell to smoking to pass the time, till there could not have been more than 10 minutes candle to burn, and Mr. Bailiff, with a glass of Ararat milk in his hand, was saying, "'Tis a curious and fine tap of Hollands you keep here, Master Block," when in walked Mr. Maskew. A thunderbolt would not have astonished me so much as did his appearance, and Elzevir's face grew black as night, but the bailiff and clerk showed no surprise, not knowing the terms on which persons in our village stood to one another, and thinking it natural that someone should come in to see the pin drop and the end of an ancient custom. Indeed, Maskew seemed to know the bailiff, for he passed the time of day with him, and was then for sitting down at the table without taking any notice of Elzevir or me. But just as he began to seat himself, Block shouted out, "You are no welcome visitor in my house, and I would sooner see your back than see your face, but sit at this table you shall not." I knew what he meant, for on that table they had laid out David's body, and with that he struck his fist upon the board so smart as to make the bailiff jump, and nearly bring the pin out of the candle. "Heyday, sirs," says Mr. Bailiff, astonished, "let us have no brawling here, the more so as this worshipful gentleman is a magistrate and something of a friend of mine." Yet Maskew refrained from sitting, but stood by the bailiff's chair, turning white and not red as he did with Mr. Glennie, and muttered something that he had as lief stand as sit, and that it should soon be Block's turn to ask sitting room of him. I was wondering what possibly could have brought Maskew there, when the bailiff, who was ill at ease, said, "Come, Mr. Clerk, the pin hath but another minute's hold. Rehearse what has been done, for I must get this lease delivered and off to Bridport, where much business waits." So the clerk read in a sing-song voice that the property of the Duchy of Cornwall, called the Mohune Arms, an inn or tavern, with all its land, tenements, and appurtenances, situate in the parish of St. Sebastian, Moonfleet, having been offered on lease for 5 years, would be let to Elzevir Block at a rent of 12 per annum, unless anyone offered a higher rent before the pin fell from the candle. There was no one to make another offer, and the bailiff said to Elzevir, "Tell them to have the horses round. The pin will be out in a minute, and 'twill save time." So Elzevir gave the order, and then we all stood round in silence, waiting for the pin to fall. The grease had burnt down to the mark, or almost below it, as it appeared, but just where the pin stuck in there was a little lump of harder tallow that held bravely out, refusing to be melted. The bailiff gave a stamp of impatience with his foot under the table, as though he hoped thus to shake out the pin, and then a little dry voice came from Maskew, saying, "I offer 13 a year for the inn." This fell upon us with so much surprise that all looked round, seeking, as it were, some other speaker, and never thinking that it could be Maskew. Elzevir was the first,